Hi, welcome to today's video. I'm going to be talking about commonplacing today and sort of trials and tribulations I've had with it over the last few months. So I suppose a bit of an introduction would be to say that I didn't know the term commonplacing till maybe about a year and a half ago, but I'd always done it in some way, in my own little way. One of the ways in which I used to do it is I would have smaller books or booklets for different subjects, but then I'd get the frustration of only maybe filling out, a third or half of a book on something, and it felt really wasteful. So when I saw this idea of having a colour-coded key and keeping everything all in one place, something really clicked into place for me. So through all of last year, I used a Moleskine book as my commonplace, and it lasted me, the year, and I was really quite happy with it. I suppose the only downside of that book for me was it was a dotted notebook, and I would sometimes find that I wouldn't write in straight lines on it, just because that's how I am. So it wasn't necessarily the tidiest, but I enjoyed writing in it a lot. And when it came to my setup for this year, when I planned out what I would be working in, when it came to a commonplace book, I picked this Hobonichi A5 notebook. It was from last year's spring release, and I bought it, in the sort of April, May time, but didn't put it to any use. And it's a beautiful notebook, so I thought, well, this might be the one for me. I set out my key here, just using some very basic dot stickers, and I did a little introduction and wrote a few articles. What I will say is there's some gaps here because I've since removed photos and used them in other notebooks. And I wrote some longer form notes and sort of article quotes and that sort of thing in here to try and feel comfy in it. And I, wrote a fair bit, but something didn't feel quite right in this, particularly when it started coming to me doing sort of work related notes. I don't know if it's to do with how thin the paper is, the lack of structure in terms of, I've drawn the margins in myself, and I always find doing that kind of thing a bit of a chore, to be honest. But I kept on it for, I think, 3 months, I'd say, roughly. Sort of middle of March towards the end of March, where this started falling away for me. And then it's sort of abandoned. So now I've got the rest of this notebook, but I'm not sure what I'll do with it. I'm sure I'll come back to it and use it for something, even if I'm using the paper from it for something. I just struggle to get on with it for whatever reason. So after that, I started taking lots of notes in my 1917, and I would still say I'm using this book, but I've not actually written anything in it for the last sort of couple of weeks. And let's have a look. So in a similar way, I wouldn't necessarily call this a commonplace book because so much of it is sort of my own thoughts. However, I did the key for it, and this has largely been, I'd say, a success. I think I filled out, I'm on sort of page 84 of it. So I've done a decent chunk in here so far, and I will keep on using this book because this essentially is supplementing my A6, essentially. So my A6, just very quickly, is my calendars and my Dear Diary sort of entries at the end of each day. Pretty much everything else for a while has been going in here now, and largely that's working quite well. So I'll flip through it quickly. Largely it's sort of to-do notes, but for longer term things or lists that I want to come back to. But then interspersed with it are things like my tarot readings. I've done a full sort of video on this book, but it's very much a hodgepodge, and it's quite messy, and that's what I like about it. And I think maybe the fact that it's in like a hardback sort of book helps with that. I've got quite big handwriting, so maybe this bigger grid size is better for me. I felt much more free in this book. And that's still, I think that's still the case. I think I'm just not necessarily needing it quite so much at the moment. So just to give you a very quick flip through. There's all sorts. A lot of this is sort of creative and art notes, but it's also an opportunity for me to play with different layouts. I'm already thinking ahead to next year, and that's something that's playing on my mind now. I think where I started getting to a turning point with this book was I had a health assessment a few weeks ago now, and in my Hobonichi book, in last year's notebook, and I think on my computer, I'd made various notes for it, and I was like, oh God, I want this all in one place for that appointment, for that assessment, because I didn't want to get more in a stress than I already was. So I just decided to spend, I think it took me a couple of days in the end, spend a good chunk of time putting all those notes in this book. And it was starting to make me think, like, this is a good book and this is helpful. You know, when you highlight stuff and then it's like, well, I might as well not have highlighted because I'm basically highlighting the whole page. That was very much me during this process. But yeah, it felt kind of odd to have this information alongside to-do lists. I can't really explain that conflict, but it felt like a conflict. And I started thinking about, is writing everything down, or writing everything down in this sort of separate book, the right thing for me? You know, I quite like the fact that I have this all here, but hey ho. Yeah, and then just a couple of, oh yeah, I made some notes for Stardew Valley. And I just, yeah, something started making me think about, okay, what other options do I potentially have? What else could work for me? And I have been watching some videos from Megan and how she was working with her notebooks last year. See, I find this really helpful space for me. Like, these are some illustrations that I worked on. I think I spoke about them in a previous video. Getting the layout of these images and thinking about the images, it was helpful to have this big space to lay them out where, yeah, in theory I could have done that in the Hobonichi, and I have got things stuck down, but it almost feels sort of too delicate, and I can be quite messy and I cross things out a lot, and I just kind of, yeah, prefer the 1917 for that. And then I've got that prep for the next week. I lost my place. Oh yeah, so I was watching videos from last year and how Megan was working with her Hobonichi cousin, and the idea of having your commonplace book mixed in with the planner and splitting the pages. My A6, I'm still working with it very much in the same way as at the beginning of the year. So, you know, I'm doing my to-do list here and my sort of end of day report kind of thing here. However, I got this Hon. I bought this as a gift. The person didn't want the gift, and at the beginning of the year this was a health tracker for me, so this has been sat on my shelf, and I thought, well, let's do an experiment. And I said to myself, through May I'll use this space as a commonplace book and see if I like doing it within a Hon, or, you know, what might be an A6 or a day 3 or something like that next year. So drew out my key, I put a habit tracker here for how frequently I'm commonplacing. As you can see, I've not kept it up, and I'll update you on that in a little bit. Oh yeah, so I decided I would try the idea of sort of splitting the page. Now naturally, the cousin, if you're splitting the page, you've still got lots of room on each page. Here, everything's very sort of condensed because of the smaller size. But I've got the beginnings of my sort of commonplace bit at the top, and then I left the bottom section for like a very quick daily log. I only did the daily log on the first, and I decided very quickly, actually, I don't like working in this way. But I'll quickly show you the notes that I've got in here. So yeah, some Stardew Valley bits and pieces. Some work notes about some product photos. A quote from Joan Didion. Some notes about planning stuff. Some notes about the film Ed Wood and the sort of deep dive that I did after that about the individuals involved in it. Yeah, and oh, I printed off this with my thermal printer, which was a tarot reading, because Something else I decided to try and implement during May is to do a single card pull of a tarot card or an oracle card each day. So I'd done this and I had this ready to stick in, and then I sort of very quickly abandoned it. So yeah, that was a very brief experiment, but I may well come back to this for some sort of purpose. What I've then moved on to doing is digital commonplacing. I decided to try a digital approach to my commonplace. So at the top here, I've got the key, and I keep this key fairly basic, fairly bland. But the good thing about digital is if I need to add a category at some point, I can just copy and paste, have a colour, write in what that item is. And the other thing that really appealed to me about digital is how much freedom I've got with images and with colour. Printers are a pain in the backside, we all know that, and ink is expensive. So if I can just copy and paste an image onto a document and resize it, that's just, yeah, amazing. That's just so straightforward. So I've been doing this since towards the end of April, just sort of quick stream of consciousness things, couple of essentially sort of brain drain personal notes. I did that on this document before I decided, actually, yeah, I'll commonplace on it. So yeah, I've got a couple of sort of personal things at the top, sort of reflections, and then more Stardew Valley notes. What's been really helpful from this point of view, so I've put the community chest items on here, what I've got outstanding. As I'm playing the game, when I find, let's say, a melon or a parsnip or whatever it might be, I just open up this Google Doc on my phone, mark the X on it, and then I can just sort of tidy up the formatting when I'm next at my laptop. So it's been really helpful for this, for me to keep track of Stardew Valley stuff. Some notes and some quotes that I've popped in. And then I've got a cover page here for May, and this is the same cover page as I printed off and then I've stuck in my A6. Yeah, so I've got a physical version of it here, and I like that it matches. I don't know, there's something about that just helps it feel cohesive. Yeah, it really does feel like these work nicely in tandem with one another. Now I think where the 1917 is still going to come in very useful for me is when it comes to being out and about, and when it comes to sort of work and creative notes. That's when I really want to do, you know, spider diagrams and things like that. Yeah, you can do that on Google Docs, but it doesn't flow so quickly. I'd end up spending more time on making sure like the formatting was right and things were spaced out well enough on the page, and getting myself tied up with that. Whereas the 1917's still like a really nice sort of messy space for me. So yeah, I did my cover page for May, and most of May's notes, I think, have been my tarot readings. So what's been really nice about this as well is, you know, sometimes you have things that fall into multiple categories. So it's just a case of putting my markers at, you know, at the top of the entry there. And yeah, I don't need to worry about the fact that I'm like wasting resources, or I'm, like I say, I'm kind of messy clumsy. Something that I get annoyed at myself for is putting down a dot sticker and it being a bit wonky, or if I've got, you know, a couple of dot stickers together, them not sitting on the line quite right, and getting quite perfectionist about it all. And again, like sort of detracting my attention away from the thing that I want to be writing about. So it's just kind of helping with that perfectionism a bit. It's also nice, you know, I can highlight bits and pieces as I want to. I can come back to these really quickly, and I've got pictures of the tarot cards as well, so they're good visuals. Got a recipe in here for carbonara because I made that for a friend yesterday. More tarot notes, another recipe, some more personal notes, tarot, some thinking about. So it's like what's been quite nice is often when I pull a tarot card, it leads me to reflect on things. So then I've used some of my own photos from you know, trips gone past and that kind of thing. I drew a card that talked about, so it was the Ace of Swords, and it's the idea of like a new journey and stuff. And the guidebook that came with one of my tarot decks said about, imagine all the things in your life being like fruit hanging from a tree. That then got me thinking about the bell jar and that metaphor of the fig tree. So there's that natural flow on of this has triggered that thought, that's triggered that thought, and I can put everything together, but everything's still in its categories. So yeah, I've been doing it digitally for a couple of weeks now, and I'm liking it. I think the only thing I don't like about it is on Google Docs, even when you zoom right out, you don't see pages next to each other, and I've not got that sort of satisfactory feeling of the physical paper in my hands, where I do love sort of flipping through pages and seeing everything laid out. I'd say that's the downside. It did occur to me to sort of maybe print my pages, put them in a binder of some sort, that kind of thing. I wouldn't say that's completely off the cards, but that does defeat the object of what I was saying before about saving money in terms of ink and that kind of thing. I think another good thing about Google Docs is what you can do when you're on Google Docs is if I searched a term like the bell jar or lentil curry, I can search amongst all my documents really quickly to find that information. So in the past, where I'd, written stuff in here for my health assessment and then had to rewrite it in the 1917, there's not going to be the need for that repetition. There's some certain things that I like to write about over and over again, certain quotes I like to rewrite. But from a practical point of view, if I just want to grab something quickly, I can just search that. So yeah, for now, I'm working digitally, plus maybe a little bit in my 1917. I think it's quite easy to get caught up in like the perfect system, and I constantly have this loop in my head of what's the right thing, what's going to work best for me, and sometimes that holds me back from actually engaging with it and doing it. So it's been quite freeing to put it all on the computer and think, well, actually, if I want a paper version of this, I literally can just print it. It's not the end of the world. And that's been quite freeing, and yeah, I'm liking that approach at the minute. We'll see how long it lasts, I think is the best way to look at it, but I'm enjoying it. I do keep thinking about next year and what I might like to do. It's strange, I think, because the planner, often you can start, when you're in Hobonichi, you can start the year in November, December time. So I feel like I've been in my books longer than I actually have, even though we're only in sort of May time. So part of me feels a bit daft for constantly thinking about what the next thing could be. It's kind of like a animal chasing its own tail or something like that. I'd be interested to know if you commonplace, what you use to commonplace. Have you tried digital? Did you get on with it? What are the pitfalls that maybe I've got to look forward to at some point? Yeah, I'd be interested. I did get recommended a different platform for digital, Obsidian I think it was called. I had one look at that and figured it wasn't for me, which maybe was a bit quick to sort of make that judgment, but it felt messy, and I've been able to customise on here the background colour, the fonts, all that sort of thing. I like that side of it, but I do miss the paper. I think I'll leave it at that because I'm just sort of rambling at this point, but hope you found that of interest. I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.